What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fit Couch. Excited for episode 3. I've got a great guest today, Kris Mcbride over here. Can't wait to get into some of his stories, and I've got some great questions to ask him that I hope will relay some cool information to you guys. Hopefully you guys got something to learn today. So, Kris, one of the things that you do that's way out of my wheelhouse, I've been in the gym for a lot of years, working in gyms, managing gyms, but from the endurance side of things, that seems to be where you tend to thrive. So share with me a little bit about, first of all, how did you get into to all this running and this crazy cardio stuff you do?
Oh man, made the mistake of marrying a wife who likes to do 5Ks on holidays. Typical story, ended up getting signed up for my first 5K for Halloween, actually back in 2019. And at that time, that was the furthest that I ever ran, which was 3.1 miles. Had a real small goal of doing a 10-minute pace, and from there it transpired into whatever it is now, which is pretty much just power hiking, if I'm going to be honest. But, I have a good time with it. Endurance has kind of always been my thing. I grew up being a swimmer and riding motocross. So that long, drawn-out grind is kind of what I've been used to my whole life. And I've ended up finding some comfort going out in the trails and being out in God's country and just spending time out there in the wild.
Nice. So from your 5K, did you do you did 5K, then 10K, then did you move up like that, or did you go from 5K straight to, hey, shit, we're going to run a marathon?
I started out really normal with the 5K, and then going to do a 10K, and actually COVID shut down the 10K and actually canceled the race that I was supposed to be doing. And so I had been training so much around my work that my wife and I actually ended up going out and running a 10K just on our own, even though we didn't get the glory of the medal and the shirt and all the fun stuff that comes with crossing the finish line. And from there, it went, half marathon. And I came up with a goal in a half marathon back when I actually used to kind of run fast, or fast for me. I wanted to run a half marathon in under an hour and 45 minutes because I ran my first one, trained for it, trained, did it in like 1:46. So I said, okay, I can get 1:45, nice even number, it sounded good. Ran another one, 1:45 and some change. Ran another one, 1:45 and some change. And met a guy actually on that run who was a member of F3, Fitness Fellowship Faith, which is a men's workout group, as you know. Great group. And
shout out to F3.
Yeah. And the gentleman was running a 20-mile run, which at the time I couldn't even fathom. I was still I'm going to run this fast half marathon. And so he was on path to run the CIM, California International Marathon, which is the real big one that happens here in December. And so I ended up working out with a lot of those F3 guys and got super motivated watching a lot of these guys who, in my opinion, weren't doing like really hefty training loads and were able just to run out and crush a marathon. Needless to say, they were in quite a bit better shape than I was, but I ended up running a training plan for a full marathon, and it went horrible. Ran a marathon my first time.
Well, a marathon to me sounds horrible from the get.
I put in a lot of work on that one, man. Did speed days, did all sorts of things. Wanted to run it in under 4 hours, which I thought seemed like it would just a walk in the park. I was thinking more realistically I was going to be 3:45, somewhere around there, which is an 8:35 pace for 26 miles approximately. And at the time I was running 8:30 paces, pretty normal on the street.
Is that pretty good, like for a marathon pace?
It's pretty good when you take into consideration that I'm a big guy. I would be pretty proud of that number. But there's a lot of guys that are a lot smaller that are running a lot faster. There's even, muscular guys such as yourself that are able to crank out like 3 hours and below on it.
Really? What does that break down to? If you did a marathon in 3 hours?
I believe it was like a 6:40 right around there. Somewhere around
maintaining that
for
all that time?
There's some pretty fast guys that.
Jeez.
So for me, like, I've never been lucky enough to be able to be one of those guys that was fast. It never came natural. Doing the hour and 45 half marathon. That was like right around a 7:10 pace. So for me, I was really, really accomplished with that. I'm not regularly a guy that cranks out like sub 7 miles or even sub 8 miles. But I ended up doing that training plan, did speed work and everything, and I bonked so hard right around mile 13. And it was so stupid because everyone told me, oh, it's net downhill. It's rolling hills, but it's net downhill. It's the easiest run you'll do, the easiest marathon you're doing. So I don't think I quite respected the distance. We ended up driving down to Lincoln. My wife and I live in Newcastle, and it's pretty hilly where we're at. And so for most of our training runs, we actually drove down to the flatlands on Lincoln to train on flat ground, which I think was probably our biggest mistake, because those rollers on the CIM, while they're not too gnarly, they're still rollers nonetheless, and they take a little bit out of you. So all of my training in the flatlands, I think, really got to me, because I came out and I was running that marathon about a month and a half after getting COVID officially for the first time, and my heart rate was just through the roof, man. I was running a pretty normal, easy pace for me, right around 8:30, which is crazy in a race that's that big, because no matter whether you're doing 9-minute pace, 10-minute pace, 6-minute pace, there's so many people at that event that you're just running in a sea of people. So no matter how fast or slow you're going, you just don't really feel like you're moving. So it's kind of hard, doing an 8:30 pace. I was just watching my watch the entire time. And right around 13 miles in, I noticed my heart rate was around 175, and that's not good news for me. And normally should be somewhere around 140 to 155, 165 if I'm pushing pretty hard. And everything just unraveled. It went horrible. From that point, it's a good thing that the road was closed. I'd have thrown myself in front of a car if I could. It
got that bad.
No, it was miserable, man.
When you say you got miserable, what is it that really changed? Were you cramping? Were you just out of breath? Were you just tired?
No, my mind goes. So my mind's the first thing to go if I'm bonk. And I never really experienced a bonk quite that bad, where you just dip. I didn't have the right amount of calories in my body for the run. I wasn't fueling properly, because I was used to fueling for a heart rate that was a lot lower than it was, and just whatever had happened, I was burning too many calories. So first thing that goes is, obviously it's harder to breathe. Your heart rate's really, really high. You can get a little bit dizzy, but at that distance, for me, it was mainly just the fact that I knew that the failure was just right there. Because to me, anything less than my goal was a failure. And I was hoping for a 3:45 finish, and I ended up crossing the finish line on that one in like 4 hours and 11 minutes, which is something I should still feel accomplished about. But I put in all the training and all the work that I thought was proper for something to be quite a bit faster. And so
but you finished it.
I did finish it.
So when you bonked out and you felt like, oh, this is over, you still squeezed out 10 more miles.
Yeah. So definitely I was about the halfway point, man. So it was pretty rough. I had and that's the problem, is that I knew I still had 13 to go. I knew that around 20 miles is when you kind of dip, and you kind of got to push through that lull. But I ended up dipping a lot earlier. And at the end of it, I didn't get that sense of accomplishment at all. I actually had a sense of frustration. I was pretty Debbie Downer there for a little bit, to the point where I didn't really want to run too much. And we had already doubled down and signed up for the Auburn Resolution Run, which happens on New Year's Day. And that was my first trail run. We ended up signing up for a 10-mile run. I'd never ran trails at all at this point. I was strictly pavement pounding, looking at my watch, looking at my heart rate, looking at my pace. I need to run at this way, this tempo, eat this. And mind you, I was a lot skinnier than I am now, which is nice, but took a lot of the joy out of it. There wasn't too much fun that happens with that, because I was running with my wife, but our goals were separate, so we didn't really accomplish the same things. We were still running separately. We'd go out for training runs, we'd start at the same time, and then I'd run as fast as I can, get to the point where we're done, and then I'd turn around and go back and get her. and we weren't really spending a lot of time together. We were suffering together, but separately. Was together doing the same thing, but separately.
We should put that on a t-shirt, suffering but separate.
Yeah. So we ended up signing up for that 10-mile run here in Auburn locally, and I did the run, and it was like really funny knowing what I know now. It was just a super basic course, and I hated probably about the first 3 miles of it, 4 miles of it, and I loved that I hated it because I was able to push through that. And then
well, it says something about you, because in the beginning of this conversation, I didn't know this about you. I know you and your wife, but I didn't realize that your wife is the one who got you into running.
Oh yeah.
Because if anyone who knows you, who's been out running with you, bike riding with you, or just hanging out, I would have completely thought it was the other way around, that you're the runner and she does it just to be supportive. But maybe it's turned into that. I don't know, but
it definitely has.
She's
flopped.
the one who created this monster, huh?
She created the monster for sure, man. So it definitely did start out that way. It started out with being what it could be. At the time when I started running, I was drinking a lot, and so drinking had begun to become kind of somewhat of what I would consider to be an issue in my life. And fortunately for me, I doubled down on the running because I realized it was a lot harder to do these runs hungover, and so. It helped me sober up enough to the point where I didn't feel like it was an issue anymore, and really just focus on training. And it was great because now I'm eating healthy. Now I'm not staying out late. Now I'm focusing on what I'm going to do that weekend for running.
Which obviously made your performance better and your recovery better, and then your times better.
For sure, yeah. I definitely reflected in all of that, and that was one of the things that was lovely to have happen for sure. But
so hold on, I want to ask you about the marathon. So when you did your first marathon, the longest what's the longest you had run straight before that?
20 miles.
Oh, you did a 20 mile run.
Yeah, I did a 20-mile run. That was part of the training plan. I found basically just your couch to marathon training plan online, which just simply Googling it, and I looked at it and I realized, okay, I think this seems doable. And it's so easy to look at things on paper and go, I got this.
Yeah. Sure.
It's a whole different beast once you get into the kids need to be fed. You got to wake up at 4 a.m. to go get this run done because it's going to be 105 out this afternoon.
Oh yeah, the logistics of everything makes it a lot harder. Yeah,
it really does, and that doesn't go away with any distance that you train for. I mean, that was there with training for a 10K. That was there with training for a half marathon. It's certainly there training for my longer distance runs.
So I'm interested about a few things here. One, a 5K. I think a lot of people have gone out. I mean, you essentially, if you're like relatively in shape, you can go out and do a 5K.
For sure.
You can be pretty out of shape and go and complete it.
Yeah.
And just show up and do it. Now, at what point do you feel like you really have to focus on inter workout fueling? Like, what distance does that hit? Is there a distance? Does there tend to be a certain point in which you need to make sure that you're fueling regularly?
Definitely. So half marathon tends to be that point for most people. If you're fast enough, you can make your way through it without it. But I know that because during training for half marathons is when I started to bonk a little bit, going out to try to do 15-mile run or something or other, and just run a little bit longer distance to make the half marathon distance feel comfortable. You start to bonk right around that 2-hour mark without fueling. Most people do. Some people are unique and different, but
so what would that look like with fueling on a? Let's jump to the marathon. Let's go from half marathon. You're doing a marathon. You've obviously learned a lot about yourself doing the first one, right? So now, if you were going to recommend something, if someone was asking you, like, what would you recommend for fueling through a marathon? Would it be like a certain amount of grams of carbs per hour? Would it be, how does that look like? What does that look like for you? I'm sure body weight changes that, but
it doesn't change it as much as you would expect. So all of my knowledge is coming from the internet, guys, so take it with a grain of salt. But everything that I have learned is that your body can digest approximately 200 calories per hour. That's the average. So training for like 100 and things like that, those longer distances, the name of the game is eating what you can. you're always going to be in a larger deficit than you can take in. So for a marathon, I would just do every 45 minutes to an hour, I would have 200 to 300 calories. I myself tend to...
And generally from simple carbohydrates, right?
So simple carbs like rice, gummy bears, gummy worms. There's all sorts of gels that you can have. There's certain gels that'll actually cater towards fats. If you're going to be a slower runner and you tend to be slower, you might actually want the fats to have the energy.
Okay, interesting.
But if you're trying to turn and burn real fast, generally carbs is the name of the game, because we can fuel off of that and get the energy burst a lot quicker. Some of the more long drawn out stuff like quesadillas, real food, really came for me right around the time that I started training for my first 100K. Real food is when I learned, okay, you need to just get something that you would have on the day-to-day that would be good for your training run, and then just whatever you did for your training run, that's all we do on race day. We don't try anything new on race day. I end up trying a lot of new things on race day, and it never goes well.
Well, if you're running a marathon or even more than that, do you have you said quesadilla? You're not eating a quesadilla out there on the road, are you?
So road running tends to be a little bit different than trail running.
Okay, well, wherever you're at.
On trails, oh yeah.
Really?
Aid stations, they'll have quesadillas, they'll have breakfast burritos. Marathon distance, generally they'll only have that type of stuff if it's like a marathon along with a with a 100K and then a 100 miler. Like there's some races where they'll group them all together like that, and the marathon will use the same aid stations that the longer distances use. But yeah, 100%.
That doesn't sit heavy in your stomach when you're running?
You train with it. So you have to train with a full stomach. You get used to running with weight in your stomach.
Oh, okay. See, this is the information I'm interested in. This is kind of what I'm really trying to learn here is when you're fueling, or even when you're training, you're actually having to train fueled.
Oh yeah.
So you know what foods work with you, what foods don't.
Definitely.
You'll learn like, okay, I digest this pretty well, I'm okay, or oh no, I can't eat this.
100%.
I'm going to have the stomach issues, right?
So you don't want to be running and burping if you're burping a lot. Like I used to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches regularly. That was my go-to thing. It was great, super easy. You could even go and get the smackers or whatever, the Uncrustables. You can get those, and that's great. The problem being is that if you put those in a drop bag, after about 4 hours of 80-degree heat, they start to sour. So
the jelly probably, huh?
Yeah. So going into aid stations, one of the most common foods that you will see for the longer distances is peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, bananas. Again, simple carbs. The peanut butter and jelly is good because you get a little bit of the fats that you get with the peanut butter as well. So you get a little pick-me-up with it. But the problem that I ran into is that I get acid indigestion real bad. Welcome to my 30s. So, I'd just be burping up, and that's not what you want to be doing when you're trying to run.
Okay. So that's a sign that you're fueling inappropriately if you're burping a lot.
Yeah, change it up for sure. So one of the first things you start out with is gels. A lot of people will go to like the popular goo brands, which is just like corn syrup. They make me want to throw up personally. But if it works for your system, if it works for your body, definitely stick with it.
I like the idea of gummy bears because
any
excuse to eat some Haribo,
the gummy bears are a perfect way to get fast carbs for sure, man. Yeah. I'd weigh them out and I'd go, okay, each bag is 400 calories, and I know, okay, a handful every hour, we're good to go. Definitely enjoyable. There's all sorts of different little things. I tried. I even did rice balls with soy sauce because you want to get a lot of sodium. Because the other thing that people don't take into consideration, I myself am an extremely heavy sweater. I sweat. I will soak clothes in the winter and just drench clothes with sweat. So sodium comes into play for me really a lot because I get heat exhaustion in weather that you don't think that you'd even have to take that into consideration. I ran Rio de Lago 100 here in November.
100 miles or 100K?
100 miles.
100 miles.
100 miles. Yeah, it was my second.
I'm interested to pick about this one. So.
Yeah, we'll double back to it, but I mean, I soaked myself and was doing. I had like 3 wardrobe changes planned, or actually had 2 wardrobe changes planned and had a third backup, and my crew chief ended up actually having to run to my house and pick up a 4th set.
Oh wow.
And came in at night just chattering, just so cold because I was soaking wet, and it was 32, 33 degrees out.
Oh man.
So
So for is fueling for these events, is it pretty linear? Like whether you're doing 30 miles or you're doing 100 miles, do you still fuel 200 calories every hour, or does it build to where like, okay, now if I'm doing over 30 miles or over 40 miles, I've got to make sure I take a break and eat a solid meal, or do I not eat a solid meal? Like walk me through what that would look like if you're doing an ultra marathon or 100
For sure.
Yeah, what that
so
look like?
some people can get away with just eating the gels and be perfectly fine, and that's going to be the same whether you're doing a marathon, 100 miler or not. Like the elites aren't eating a lot of like really solid food. They're eating their gels and a lot of times boiled potatoes. They stick to what they know. For myself, what I do is I do a combination where I'll have my running food, and then I also try to eat like an actual meal 3 times during the duration of a 100 miler or even 100K. I'm not one of the faster guys, so I tend to be on the slower end of things. So if it's around lunchtime and I know that I'm going to be able to plan an actual meal, I'm definitely going to get in like a burrito, something with rice, beans, potatoes is another great thing. Like they'll do breakfast pancakes in the morning on some of those longer distances. Man, those pancakes taste really
these
good.
are great foods that we generally recommend that people eat before a hard weight training session.
Okay.
And weight training, I mean, we're doing like what? I mean, if you're really crazy, maybe up to 2 hours, but usually an hour and a half is a great weight training session. And we're wanting to carb up for that. So I can't imagine what it would be for 100 miles during the marathon. You're fueling like 200 calories every hour, and then you're not really needing to eat many solid meals, right?
No,
because you probably ate a good solid meal beforehand, and you're going to eat afterwards. So you can kind of just supplement with some simple fuel, gels, gummy bears along the way, right? But now if you're doing 50K or 100K, the planning for that's a lot different.
So the 50K, it's pretty much the same. Not to knock anyone who feels accomplished off of 50K, but it's only 5 miles more than a marathon.
Oh, sorry, I think I meant 50 miles.
Yes, 50 miler for sure. I've never done a 50 miler. I've gone the distance, but never actually done just a 50 mile. I would probably treat a 50 mile pretty similarly to what I would do for a marathon, and then just have one meal in between it. Any of these distances, once you get into marathon and beyond, you're going to do what's called carb loading, and you'll start 3 days beforehand. So 3 days before your actual event, you're going to throw on an extra serving of whatever carbs you're going to have for dinner. You're going to want to have 500, 600 calories extra of carbs, since we know that carbs enjoy hydration. So now you're going to be also taking in a lot more water and being hydrated before the event. You're going to front load a little bit of the energy that you're going to burn off.
So you got topped out glycogen stores,
Exactly.
Liver's full of glycogen, muscles are full of glycogen, and then you're depleting that. No matter what, you're going to be in a deficit at the end of this run, but you're trying to minimize how deep of a deficit or the length of time before that deficit hits you, right?
You're correct. And then there's several different brands that make like great recovery drinks that you can drink right afterwards. And across the finish line, one of the first things you do is pop one of those drinks. It's got some carbs in it, it's got a little bit of protein in it, even a little bit of fats to help pick you up, some amino acids, that type of thing, help you a little bit with recovery. And if you get those in right away, it's really great, because there's been far too often times where you go out for a training run and you get home and all of a sudden the kids are screaming, the kids need this or need that. Next thing you know, I realize it's been an hour and a half and I'm just really grumpy for some reason, and it's because I haven't ate.
Oh yeah. I know that feeling. Even just after a hard weight training session is the same thing.
Definitely get hangry.
Yeah. So for people who are interested, or even for myself, like I've done the 5Ks. I hate running, as you know. You ran with me. You're the only reason I've ever ran, really, unless something scary's chasing me. But if someone wants to train for a marathon and all they've done is a 5K, what would be? I know this might be, in a nutshell, kind of brief overview, but what would be a strategic training plan for someone to train for a marathon? Like, how many days a week are they running? Are they increasing their time? Are they focused on getting faster? You mentioned earlier speed work. Do you have an A day and a B day of training? How does that look? What would
So
the
if
training
your
look
goal is just to finish, it's going to be time on feet. So if your goal is just to finish, you really want to get out there and you want to cross that finish line before whatever the cutoff is. We're going to pay attention to time on feet, so that can be even going for walks, hikes, jogging, things of that nature, because we're not too worried about pace. Now, if you're worried about pace and you have a goal that you want for pace, you're going to at least once a week be doing some form of speed work. You're going to have your for me, I like to do a lot of low heart rate training, it's called. So I'll even end up walking during some of my runs. I'll run until it gets to a point where my heart rate reaches a certain point, and then I'll start walking for a little bit.
So it's kind of like interval training.
It is.
When you're doing the speed work, you're going are you going as hard as you can? Are you shooting for like a specific heart rate and then a duration of time to maintain that heart rate? And then giving yourself like a active recovery and then hitting that again? Is that kind of what that looks like?
So for low heart rate training, no. Low heart rate training is basically you're trying to actually run slow enough to not raise your heart rate over a certain rate, which for me would be about 144 beats per minute.
Okay.
So but when I'm doing speed workout, so speed, if I can, I'll head to the track and I'll warm up with like a mile, and then after that I'll do intervals of basically all out as fast as I can go for 2.5 minutes, or just whatever time it might be, 3 minutes we'll just say, and then I'm gonna walk for now 2 minutes, and I'm going to start to light jog, and then I'm going to get back into another 3-minute sprint essentially.
Oh, okay.
And so I'll just do that on repeat for 4 or 5 times, at least once a week. And if you do that once a week, you're supposed to be able to get faster. You're supposed to get used to it. It's been a while since I've done speed workout.
How would you progressively overload that? So you do that for 1 time a week, like you just explained. Mm-hmm. So then would week 2, would you do the same thing, or are you pushing to make that 3-minute sprint 3.5-minute sprint? Or are you trying to cover more ground over that 3 minutes? Like, how would you overload or progress yourself over the weeks for like speed work, for example?
For sure. So with any type of training plan that you have, you're going to increase your training load about 10 to 20% each week. So if we're going to start out at, let's just say, we're going to run 3 miles on Tuesday, we're going to run 4 miles on Wednesday, and then on Saturday we're going to end up running 8 miles. The very next week we're going to end up running probably something like 4, 4, and 10. And it's going to gradually go up like that for 2 to 3 weeks, and then you're going to have a step down week, like a recovery week, where you're going to do a little bit less mileage. So all the while when you're doing this, you're still going to run a warm-up, and then you're going to do whatever, we'll just say 5 3-minute sprints with walking in between. Eventually what the goal is okay, now instead of walking in between, we're going to be jogging in between.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
So you're going to just try to get the recovery time as quick as possible.
Could you also do that by shortening the time you're doing the walking?
You
could. So to do
the
3-minute sprint, 2-minute walk. The next week you do 3-minute sprint, 1:45 walk. The next week 1:30 walk, and you kind of move that down and try to increase the amount of time spent sprinting.
You do, but the thing about it is that you're going to have your speed workout, which is the design is to get faster. So that's where that sprint comes in. It's almost like doing 30 rep instead of doing a max weight, 10 rep workout or something along that line. You want to make sure that your sprint is as quality as it can be without too much recovery time. So you're going to be sprinting at, we'll just say, a 6-minute pace, right? Which for some it might be faster, but you sprint at a 6-minute pace. I'm not trying to run a marathon at a 6-minute pace. I'm trying to run a marathon at an 8.5-minute pace. So you're still going to have, every couple of weeks, you'll have a marathon pace run, or your long run is always supposed to be like an easy run. So it's supposed to be kind of like that low heart rate design, where it's like, we're going to go out, we're going to run for a little bit, and if it starts feeling too hard, we're going to walk, because the buildup is race day. Training is just where we get comfortable with embracing the suck.
Okay. That's a great way to explain it.
Yeah. And so if if you're feeling really froggy and you're feeling really good, what you might end up doing is at the end of whatever your long run is that weekend, if it's 13 miles, you're still feeling pretty good around mile 10. You might just run the last 3 miles at race pace just to see how you feel when you're done and see how your heart rate recovers. Because that's really what we care about, is what's your heart rate doing at the end of that time.
Okay, well then that's when you're, let's just use the 3-minute sprint thing. We'll just use that number just as a plug number. So you do the 3-minute, like all out, as fast as you can go for those 3 minutes. And do you determine the active recovery time or the walk time by your heart rate? So do you wait for your heart rate to get to a certain threshold before you sprint again? Or are you just worried about having a set time and then reducing that time or increasing the sprint time?
So at first it definitely starts out, it's just time, because we're still learning. It's still unique and different to us because we're just used to just running, right? So fortunately for me, I have a decent watch, and my watch is pretty cool. It even has a sprint now, run now, walk feature on it. So you can even pre-program, pre-time all of that into your watch. You can build your workout that way.
Which watch is that?
This is the Garmin Forerunner 955.
Oh, okay. Just so you know, we're not sponsored by Garmin, so I don't get any kickbacks from them. But...
Certainly do not.
Yeah.
But it's pretty cool that it has that built in.
Yeah.
Where building off of that comes from is now looking at your heart rate and realizing, hey, I've been at 130 beats per minute since 2 minutes. I'm not going to waste another minute walking. I'm going to get back up to running. So the idea is to make it so that you're running, jogging, and then sprinting, jogging, and then sprinting.
Okay.
We're only walking if our heart rate doesn't recover low enough, because you don't want to start a sprint while you're still 180 beats per minute. It's just not going to be an effective sprint. You're not going to.
Yeah, it's just, you're just wasting that sprint
opportunity.
Yeah.
So eventually the game plan is to kind of run, for me at least, based off of my heart rate, keep it around 140. Once I'm at 140, okay, maybe I give myself a minute to make sure that I'm not going to have any unnecessary spikes, and then we're going to get right back into working. We're going to sprint now, and we're going to run fast.
So let's see if we can paint the picture, because running 100 miles is just like, that's next level craziness, right? That's extreme. I want to know that journey of that 100 miles. Like, I'm sure a lot of it's obviously physical battles, but you're battling a lot of mental demons out there too, I'm assuming, right? I've never ran that much. So 100 miles you're running, like at what point do you feel like, I'm sure that it comes in phases too, but at what point did you feel like, holy crap, I don't even know if I can do this anymore? Like, or did that come in cycles?
No, so for me, I've always been very goal oriented, and so since it's that way, I've put in the work in the training, and so I know that for me, it's point A to point B. That's all it is. Quitting's not an option. I did my training. I have a wonderful support crew out there who I'm depending on, and now they're depending on me being there. Yeah. So I need to show up for the people that showed up for me. Mm-hmm. So you have dips, you have low moments for sure, but I'm never doing math. In shorter distances, I'm doing math going, okay, hey, I'm 13 miles in, okay, I only got a half marathon left to go, or I only got 10 miles to go.
Okay. So it's easier to be clock watching with those shorter times?
With those shorter times, and when you're training, that's when you're going through it. Everything that you've done for the months and months and months leading up to it came up to this one moment right here. And so this one moment is, I need to take it in and be present as much as I can. For me, I'm a faith-based individual, so I spend a lot of time out in prayer when I'm out on the trails.
Nice.
Especially depending on the Lord to get me through, because I know for certain that it's going to take more than just me and more than me training to be able to get to the end of whatever race distance that I'm doing.
Especially 100 miles.
Especially 100 miles.
So was there a mile point that really broke you, like where you felt like physical agony, or you couldn't digest food? Like if you're trying to fuel for 100 miles, there's got to be a point where your stomach's like giving you some issues. Even if it's easy digestible carbs, I would assume that there's got to be some point that you feel your body rejecting that, right? Was there
100%. So my first 100, it went about like my first marathon went. It was pretty horrible. The skies opened up on us. It was downpouring rain, some of the steepest terrain that I've ever ran on, and running on that, I ended up doing the cardinal rule, which is to do nothing new. I wore new socks, thinking that these new socks were going to be better for my feet.
Bad luck, huh?
Well, the new socks, they were double banded, which meant that they were thicker at the top, which is great because now things can't fall into my foot and get into my shoe and get in and mess up my feet.
But circulation.
But it cut off the circulation.
Yeah.
So I ended up dealing with, it was horrible. We were worried about blood clots there for a little bit. I lost all lift function in both of my legs right around the 62-mile mark, which, should feel like a pretty big accomplishment because that's the 100K distance, which again, for me, I'm going to always grasp to the familiarity of what races or what distances we race, which is going to be a 50 miler, which I don't really acknowledge, a 100K, which is 62 miles, 100 miles, which, it doesn't sound like much when you think, okay, the natural progression is 100K to 100 miler, but needless to say, it's over a 50K further, which is 50K is the first point that we acknowledge is an ultra.
To double.
It is. It's closer to double, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of one of those things where you don't really think too much about it, but I ended up choking out my ankles. They stopped working. We were pushing, my wife and I, that is, we're pushing cutoff times because we ended up choosing what I guess would be considered one of the more difficult 100s to do as our first one. I don't really do things the easy way. I tend to make them the most difficult possible. One of the things that I always talk to people about is, well, if it was easier, we'd just run it faster and find a different way to make it harder. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's not designed to be easy. You're designed to test yourself, and that's what we're out there for.
So if your ankles gave out, that means you don't have a lot of flexion at the ankle, right? So your whole gait has to change at that point.
Yeah, so I'm no longer running at this point. Fortunately, on this run, they allowed trekking poles, they're called, which really I used like crutches. I leaned on those things and depended on them to get me through to the end.
Oh, so from 62 miles to the end, you weren't actually running?
Oh, no, there was no running happening at that point.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm a glorified power hiker, man.
Oh, okay.
I'm a slow guy. The only time that, I was moving and it was horrible. We get on downhills, and what would happen is I had no deflection in my ankle. It wouldn't move forward. So as I was stepping, I'd step on a downhill,
like
and my weight on my heel, all of my weight on my heel, and on my weight would go to my toes, and it would basically just be ripping. And so I felt just tearing of like all
in your calf.
No, all in my front of my ankles and shins.
Oh.
It was all in the front. So the calves were fine for the most part. So it just felt like ripping, just kind of like walking on glass or hot coals would be the best way to describe it. And I knew that I was pushing the time. I came in to Cool 2, which is the 70-mile mark, and I had to do a shoe change. And I did a shoe change actually on the trails because I had to leave because they have what's called a cutoff at certain aid stations, which is if you don't get here by this time, we're pulling you off the course and you're DNFing.
Oh, really?
You're not finishing this race, and not because you're not willing to keep going, but because their permits only allow so many people to be out on the trails by this specific time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I was chasing cutoffs, it's called, pretty much all night long.
So you said you were changing your shoes. What's the normal? How often do people change their shoes running 100 miles? Is that pretty common for everyone to change their shoes at some point?
It's pretty common for people to change their shoes. Again, I'm a bigger guy, so since I'm a bigger guy, my cushion's going to wear out of those things a lot quicker than most people. So for me, I'm changing my shoes right around that 30-mile mark.
So you're doing like
I'm doing two to three shoe changes.
Oh, okay.
I was blessed this last run that I did, the last Rio de Lago run. I didn't have to change my socks once. Normally you're changing socks and shoes My feet stayed dry the whole time. I actually kept a pair of shoes on the longest I've ever worn them, which was about 46 miles.
So when your socks were cutting off your circulation, you didn't change your socks out?
Well, I didn't know what it was at first. I was thinking that it was the aggressive downhills. I had also laced up my shoes tighter because I was worried that I was going to slip and fall forward in my shoes or be moving around because it was so muddy I was having to dig my heels in. So I wanted to tighten my shoes up because I was worried that I was going to slide around and get a blister, and the last thing I wanted was a blister. Well, I basically sabotaged myself because when I tightened up my shoes along with the socks, now it cut off all the circulation to my feet, and I basically had shallow Hal once a gal, the cankles.
I was thinking Mr. Deeds.
Mr. D, yeah, like the Blackfoot. Yeah, there's a couple toes that looked like that for sure. But no, you whack this thing with the fire pick.
Yeah.
I ended up basically having absolutely no calves. I got to the point where recovery for that
Story of my life.
recovery for that was horrible, man. I had buckets of ice that were sitting next to the couch, and I couldn't lift my feet to walk because I was so messed up and everything was so swollen. I'll have to send you a picture. I don't know if I ever did, but they were bruised, just purple and brown.
I want to get to that in a second because I want to paint that picture at the end. I want you to paint that for me because I've heard some of it, but I don't think I've heard all of it. But do you have an estimate on like that 100-mile run you did? How many calories you consumed in that time?
Oh, I have no clue.
No.
Yeah, because your stomach does shut off. Your brain, you stop thinking. At least for me, again, I'm a slower guy. I'm out
physically
there long,
and mentally.
drawn out. Yeah, definitely. It sounds like fun. Let's go run 100. So I think you got to have a screw loose at some point.
Yeah, I didn't even sign
to
up
be
for
able to
that.
commit to that.
How long did that take you to run the 100 miles?
The very first one I did, I ran it in 34 hours and 45 minutes. I made it 15 minutes before the final cutoff.
Wow.
For the Western States lottery ticket, which the goal is Western States. You have to run qualifying races to be able to even qualify, and then they put you in what's called a lottery process, which is a whole nother thing that we could explain. You could Google it, but
so 34 hours?
34
and
hours,
you didn't
45
sleep?
minutes. I laid down one time, and I was blessed to be able to run it with my good friend Justin, who at the time was quite gassy, and he laid down next to me, and it's kind of hard to sleep with someone farting on your head pretty much. And at that point, you're stoving up. Things are so tight on you when you stop moving. It just
So he passed his gas onto you, and
he
you
passed
just
his
used that
gas
for fuel,
onto me, and I just got up and just said, "Let's just keep walking." But one of the things I wasn't even sure at the time that I was going to be able to make it in time because again I was walking so slow. I was trying to run, but just physically unable to. I was in excruciating amounts of pain. I made it 15 minutes before the cutoff. I had 2 people that finished after me. And so I was perfectly fine. I just kept praying and saying, Lord, just get me there. I don't care if I'm dead last. Just if at all possible, get me there before the 35-hour cutoff. Let this be meaningful. Let this serve its purpose, which was to get that Western States lottery ticket.
And you did.
And I did. Yeah, I got there. I got to the end, and like I said, 2 people finished after me, and I'd have been perfectly fine being dead last.
So, learning what the mistakes you ran your first marathon, you learned some mistakes, some things you could have done differently.
Sure.
I'm sure you did the same thing with the 100-miler. So, what are some of the things that you learned from your first 100-mile run that you wish you would have known before, or that you're going to bring on to your next 100-mile run?
Just don't even try sleeping. It's pointless. I can go 35 hours without sleep, so there's no point in even stopping.
So no sleep. Team no sleep.
Team no sleep. Yeah, we actually ended up doing a second one, and when we did the second one, I trained a little bit less encumbered, so I didn't run with as heavy of a pack. I trained a little bit more on the road for the second one so that I wouldn't be out running for 7-8 hours every Saturday, which has its benefits and its negatives definitely, its drawbacks. But I think the biggest thing was you have to keep moving and you have to keep eating because
fueling is key.
Fueling is extremely key.
Super overlooked, and I think a lot of people overlook it because most people who are going out on a run are running like between half a mile and 5 miles, and you can run on stored energy with that. But when you're starting to go long distances, you have to make sure the electrolytes and the carbohydrates are that you got enough gas in your tank. And did you learn anything about fueling more properly after the first one? Did you feel like you fueled well? It was just other circumstances that really beat you down?
I think that I fueled better on my first one than I did on my second one.
Oh, okay, wow.
My first one, I was extremely like I had a Apple Notes and checklist of I'm going to eat this every hour, and I followed it to the T until about that 32-hour mark, because I knew that I was going to make it to the end, and I knew that I was dealing with a lot bigger things. My second one, I kind of dropped off on fueling, and I think that was ultimately part of my downfall. I talked a little bit more to my crew chief about that, because that's the thing too, that you get into these distances, you have people that are basically telling you what you need and telling you what you need to do.
Well, because your brain's really not working.
It's not working at all. I'm on sensory overload. I don't really know. I'm existing in a space, and I'm just there. And it's the most peaceful space that I've ever been in my life. It's the only time my brain's ever shut off. I didn't know that your brain could shut off until I was about 19 hours in on my first 100 miler. Right around that 19-hour mark, it got real peaceful in my brain, and I think of it sometimes like almost like a lot of people have seen Stranger Things, where it's like the black hole or something, where whatever the gal's name is that's in there, 11.
Yeah, 11. She
goes into the space in her brain, and she's just kind of in. It's just blank. Nothing's going on.
That's kind of how it is.
That's kind of how it is, and it's pretty peaceful.
So after the 100 miles, when you're done, how many days did that recovery process take? Did you break any bones? Did you fracture any bones? Were you able to walk the next day? Like, tell me and the people who are listening right now, like, what did the day after and the next however long that took to recover, what did that all look like?
Yeah, it's a pretty sore subject right now. Definitely dealing with some stuff. So my first one, I dealt with, like I said, those ankle problems, and it was like bruised, and it took a solid 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
I went back to work 1 week later. I'm pretty active at my work as far as walking around goes and whatnot. So I switched gears at the time after my first one pretty quickly, as you remember, to bicycling, because I was training for the 24-hour bike-a-thon that I did, the agony ride, and I ended up getting back to running on that one, shorter distances and whatnot, right around 2 to 3 weeks. Doubled down, did my
so you didn't lose toenails or feet didn't turn black?
First one, I didn't lose toenails. I had some blisters that were pretty bad, but you cut those off and they harden, they callus. First one,
did you? I thought I remember you. Maybe you can retell the story, because I don't want to tell it wrong, because I think it was amazing. Was when I think it was that night you went to sleep.
Oh goodness! This one.
Did you have nightmares? Were your legs cooperating? Were other body parts cooperating?
So first night I went to sleep, I forgot about this. Thanks for bringing this up, Brad.
Yeah, just not to
So Brad heard this story. It's not embarrassing at all. It's part of it, man. I ended up, I laid out. I got home, and when I had got home, I finished at like 9:30 at night, and so it was so late. I ended up laying out on the bed, and I had my legs propped up with like pillows, and was just trying to fall asleep. But I was in so much pain. You have so much inflammation. You're so hot. Your whole body's so warm. You can't get comfortable at all. Well, I had also rehydrated, and I woke up right around that 12 a.m. mark and did everything I could to stand up, and I could not stand up, and I had to pee, and I had to pee so bad that I stood up enough to be able to lean against the wall and grabbed the laundry hamper, and I peed in the laundry hamper. It was not one of my prouder moments.
And
I was so out of it. I was so tired, so sleep deprived. I didn't even remember that I did it or know that I did it the next morning. My wife woke up, and when she woke me up, she said, "Hey, did you go to the bathroom last night?" And I had this dream like that happened, at which point I realized it was not a dream. So yeah, in one of my less finer moments, was totally unable to actually get up and walk myself to the bathroom.
Were you unable to get up and walk for a couple days?
I was unable to walk that day. They actually got me like a little cane, and what we found out that worked really well was if you stood on washcloths, you could just slide your feet instead of having to lift your feet. And so I slid my feet over to the couch, and then my wife waited on me hand and foot, even though she was recovering from her 100 miles too, because she ran it with me.
She didn't beat her up as bad as you?
She was beat up, but not nearly as bad as me on that one. Roles reversed second time out. We ended up running Rio del Lago, which we weren't even planning on running. We only doubled down on that one because we signed up for a 50K to do as a training plan for our Canyons training run for the 100 miler, our first 100 miler. Well, I didn't want to run another 50K, and so when they said, "Hey, we'll give you guys registration," we said, "You know what? We're going to want to run another one, so let's just run another 100 miler." And so we doubled down. We ran another 100 miler, and this time around, recovery was going great. I was feeling so good after that one. I was looking up 200-mile runs, thinking, yeah, maybe I could actually do one of these.
Wow.
And it's like childbirth is what a couple of women that I've talked to have related it to, saying, you just kind of forget how badly it sucks and think, I want to do that again.
Yeah.
So
I can't relate.
Yeah. So I ended up we ended up doing that, and I ended up going back to work 3 days later. My wife was a little bit more messed up for that one, so I was kind of waiting on her hand and foot. Roles reversed. It was nice. I ended up going to work and deciding, you know what? I'm feeling so good. I'm gonna stretch. I really want to get in there, get feeling better. So I stretched, and I think that after months, we finally figured out that I strained my calf muscle, whether it was during the 100 miles or whether it was during stretching. I'm not sure. I think it was probably during stretching. So I'm still at the process right now of actually kind of bouncing back. We're going on two solid months right now.
Wow.
After my last 100, and I'm right around that 6 mile phase. I just ran 6 miles last weekend and felt great, and then decided to go on a 24-mile bike ride afterwards and killed myself in true Mcbride fashion and just kind of went out and overdid it. And so I'm actually dealing with that a little bit right now myself, still feeling a little bit sore. I'm actually going to get out tomorrow for a 4-mile run, trying to get back into the swing of things now for sure, but trying to also take it easy and allowing my body some time to heal.
Nice.
During this kind of injury repair session that I've been in since the last one, I kind of started really thinking and realizing I haven't taken much time off. I kind of just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to run, and I'm going to get in there, and I'm going to do it, and then just kept doing it.
Yeah, I think that's the addict in us, right?
It's definitely the addictive side of my personality. My first 50K was supposed to be a 25K, and I made a wrong turn during a training run and said, you know what? I've already gone further than 25K. It just feels like it'd be pointless. Let's see if we can double up on it and do a 50K. And my first 100 miler was the same thing. It was supposed to be 100K. I ended up getting a bunch of these guys in F3. Say, hey man, let's go do this 100K. Let's go do this. And I pulled a fast one on them, and I said, you know what? I paced my buddy for Rio, and it motivated me to really want to get to the 100-mile mark. And so I doubled down on that one. I said, you know what? I'm going to see if I can change my registration. I prayed on it for a while. I said, let's see, if the Lord wants me to do this, He'll allow me to be able to get in there, and they'll respond with an email and say, hey, you can change your registration. And so I sent reluctantly an email saying, hey, can I go from the 100K to the 100 miler? Kind of honestly hoping that they'd say no. They didn't say no.
All right, nice. So part of one of in our addictive behaviors can be a strong point is that we push the envelope on hard things, which can be good, right? It can be good or bad. One of the things I have a problem with, I don't know, maybe you have this problem too, is even in weight training, as we progress every week and we lift heavier and heavier and heavier, we need to do a taper. We call it a deload, right? And it's mentally the hardest thing to force yourself to do, because I like being in fifth gear, and when I have to shift to second or third for a week, I feel like I'm cheating myself, even though I know logically I'm not. Do you find it hard to taper on taper weeks?
It is the worst thing to deal with in my life.
Okay, yeah. So
it is so mentally stimulating to be able to go out and run for 10, 15 hours a week.
Especially if you're feeling good that day, right? It's like, it's a deload or a taper week. I need to go lighter or slower, but I'm feeling really good. Yeah.
I never feel good.
Yeah.
I never feel good. I feel worse. Things start to shorten, things start to tighten up. All of my runs start to feel more difficult. Now mentally I'm feeling worse. I have yet to nail the taper, I guess. I thought that even if your body starts to feel good, your mind starts to feel crappy.
Yeah, that's the part that I battle with.
Did you do enough? Oh, you haven't been doing enough. Oh, you need to be out there running more. Oh, you're losing your fitness. You're losing your cardio.
Totally. Yeah, I know.
It's so, my mind's my biggest thing to overcome.
But you would admit, though, that it's a very valuable thing to...
Super necessary. It's important to be able to do. You have to. Whether you feel horrible or not, your body's still repairing.
Which is a great... lesson for people. Get a coach, or get someone to help you, because mentally you're going to make justifications and rationalizations for things that you may want to do or you think are good for you, but may not be good for you, or maybe you just shouldn't do. But we'll find a reason to push hard and hard and hard and hard until something breaks, right? When really we should have taken that taper. And I think that's been a hard thing for me in the gym. But when you do it and then you come back and you realize, wow, my performance actually did get better, it helps sell you on it. So
I think the biggest thing is learning the difference between discomfort and pain. There's going to be days where you're a little bit uncomfortable, and maybe it's caused by a little bit of pain. Again, the addictive gene in me tends to be really good at suffering, and so my level of pain and my tolerance of pain might be slightly greater than other people. I've had a lot of injuries from motocross and dirt bikes over the years that have led me to quite a bit of pain, and the name crash dummy for F3. So I mean,
that's where that comes from.
Yeah, that's where that comes from. All the injuries, I have this tricep. I've had multiple surgeries on that humerus. I've had back surgery. I've dealt with quite a few different things that. So for me, my level of discomfort is probably a little bit greater than other people's, but understanding the difference between this is pain and I'm doing more harm than I am good is the biggest thing. And we learn that during training. And so it comes into play definitely on race day, and especially with the taper, remembering to remind yourself this is serving its purpose. My body is healing right now.
Even though your brain is combative with it, right?
Yeah, do a little bit more active recovery. Do some stretching, which for me, if you want to talk about things you hate, I hate stretching. One of the most necessary things that I do almost every day in my life. I did cold plunges for a long time. I got a chest freezer that I converted to cold plunges, and I was doing those regularly for pretty much the entire year until just a few months ago I finally drained it and said, all right, I'm going to take some time off for that. But I need to do things that I hate to feel like I'm doing enough to feel prepared. And that's where doing those doing those cold plunges, or even stretching, that's where all of that comes into play for me.
So my key takeaways from this has been, if you want to go out there and cover distance, and your goal is just to achieve a distance, just get used to being out there on your feet. Definitely. Just like when we were doing the bike ride, we needed time on the bike. Didn't really matter how fast we were pedaling or even how many miles we covered. It was just about how long can I keep myself in the saddle here and build up that tolerance. I guess same thing with running. And then when we start to get some of these extreme distances, there's a lot more that we need to break down with not just training, but recovery and fueling, right? So if people at home want to find you on social media, if they want to find you on Instagram, maybe follow your journey on these ridiculously long runs, where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. I believe my name on there is KMF_987. I do have a YouTube. It's called Kris and Tabby. You can find me on there. There's a few different short clips that I have summarizing a couple of my different runs that I've done. I am on Facebook. If you look up Kris Mcbride, you'll find me on there as well. So I'm on all the social media platforms. I'm not very good about responding too much. I'm good about meme dropping and blowing everyone up with that. But
all right, if you want really inappropriate memes, make sure you follow Kris Mcbride. If you want to follow his running or maybe even reach out and get some tips, that's a great place to find some information. He's my go-to with endurance because that's out of my scope of practice or my what I'm familiar with. But anyway, Kris, I think you're a awesome dude, good friend of mine, and the fact that you can run 100 miles and live to tell the tale says a lot about you. So
yeah, I'm super happy to be on here. Thanks for having me. It was
appreciate you, man.
Great time.